During London's most anticipated social season, there was one name that started to be mentioned constantly, not with admiration, but with malice and curiosity. It was the name of the Montclair family, and at the center of it all was Arabella Montclair, a young lady at just 19, famous for her impeccable poise and a wit as sharp as the dangerous tongues of high society. But what she thought was the height of cruelty was only the beginning. The first comment surfaced at the opening ball of the season in the magnificent Golden Hall of the Arkcraft family. I heard the Montclairs are on the brink of ruin, and that Lord Montclair lost more than just money in his latest dealings. Arabella heard her name echo among muffled laughter. When she turned around, the glances scattered like startled birds. She kept her chin up, but she felt the blow. Her father was a respected man, her family traditional. Those whispers weren't just gossip. They were a swag. In London, reputation was everything. Arabella was discreet and had few friends. And if there was anyone Arabella trusted completely, it was Lady Beatrice Harrington. Beatrice was witty, observant, and had been Arabella's friend since childhood. One afternoon in the rose-covered gardens, as they talked about the rumors swirling around Arabella's family, Beatrice said, "Bella, this is ridiculous," she said, holding her friend's hands. "Someone is trying to harm your family." "But who would do something like that?" Arabella asked. "I don't know, but it's definitely someone who's jealous of your family." A few days later, a new rumor began to circulate. During an afternoon tea, people were saying that Lady Arabella was desperate for a wealthy marriage to save her family. The story also spread that Arabella had turned down two important suitors because they were hoping for a duke or an earl. A lady whispered, "They say she plans to get married before the family's creditors show up." Arabella felt her face burn. She had never said anything like that. And then the most scandalous rumor of all emerged, that she had been seen alone with the mysterious Duke Sebastian Belmonte. Sebastian was known for his dangerous charm and for never staying in one place long enough to put down roots. But unfortunately, the story spread way too fast. Some claimed they had talked for almost an hour. Others suggested something even worse, that the meeting had been secret. Arabella had spoken with the Duke, yes, but it was only for a few minutes, and in a hallway full of guests. Nothing like what people were saying. After that rumor started, when he found her at the literary soiree, his gaze was full of curiosity. He said, "It seems like we're characters in a story we don't even know, Lady Arabella." Arabella turned to him and said, "If you find this amusing, I'm afraid I don't share the same enthusiasm. If you'll excuse me." She then left the library, upset by his boldness. Just when Arabella thought things couldn't get any worse, another rumor started. Now, people were saying that the Montclair family was planning to quietly sell two properties in the countryside to pay off debts. And what was the problem? That information seemed incredibly specific. Someone even mentioned the exact name of the property. Another person commented that the paperwork was already being prepared. Arabella went cold. That sounded like information from inside the family, or from someone very close to her. That same afternoon, Arabella ran into Beatrice and a friend in the gardens. Beatrice looked worried. "Bella, this is getting out of control," said Beatrice. "What do you mean, my friend?" Beatrice hesitated for a moment. She heard some things this morning. Worse things. Arabella frowned. Arabella was frightened. What things? That maybe your family is hiding more than we think. Arabella was shocked. "And do you believe that, Beatrice?" Beatrice answered quickly, "Of course not, but I worry about your family's reputation. If this keeps up, it'll be very hard for you to find a husband." Arabella then realized she needed to act quickly. Each new rumor was like a crack in her family's reputation, and before long, the whole structure could collapse. If she didn't find out who was spreading those rumors, the name Montclair would be remembered as just another scandal of the London season. So she started to observe. Soon, a few names started to come to mind. First, there was Celeste Montclair, her cousin. Celeste didn't live with the family, but she showed up at their house almost every day. She attended the teas, the dinners, the balls, always with a sweet smile and watchful eyes. Lately, though, Arabella had started to notice something strange. Celeste seemed a little too interested in the family's conversations. Once, during dinner, Celeste casually asked Uncle Charles, I heard that some properties in the countryside might be sold. That true? Arabella was surprised. That topic had only been discussed between her father, mother, and herself the night before. How could Celeste know? When Arabella asked, Celeste laughed again. Oh, darling, but everyone talks about everything in this town. But Arabella wasn't so sure about that. Another person started to catch her attention. The housekeeper, Joanna. She had managed the Montclair residence for years. She was discreet, efficient, and she seemed to know absolutely everything that happened inside the house. Arabella noticed something curious. Whenever conversations took place in the parlor, Joanna would show up right after, arranging flowers, adjusting curtains, or picking up teacups. Later, Arabella mentioned to her mother that she might turn down an invitation. The next day, two ladies were already talking about it. They say Lady Arabella is already starting to decline certain events. How could anyone know about that so quickly? So Arabella started the thing. The housekeepers talked to the servants. Servants talked to coachmen, and coachmen talked to half the city. And just like that, a secret could travel very far. But there was also Edmund Montclair, a distant cousin. Edmund was polite, charming, but overly interested in the family's finances. At a recent dinner, he remarked, I imagine maintaining an estate as large as the Montclairs isn't exactly cheap. Arabella replied calmly, Our family manages its affairs very well. Edmund smiled. But that smile seemed calculated. Arabella knew that if anything happened to her father, Edmund could claim part of the family's property. That didn't mean he was spreading rumors, but it certainly gave him some motives. Another figure who raised suspicions was Wade Lynch, a neighbor known for her love of gossip. Lady Lynch was present at almost every social event, and she always seemed to know exactly what comment to make to spark a conversation. Once, she said in an innocent tone, My dear Arabella, I hope these rumors about your family aren't true. Arabella replied coldly, What rumors, Lady Wind? The lady then smiled. Oh dear, there are so many. It's hard to keep up with them all. That sounded like a provocation. And so Arabella decided to ask her friend Beatrice for help. Beatrice, I need to find out who's doing this. Beatrice looked at her with concern. Honestly, my friend, these rumors are getting really dangerous. Arabella nodded. And they're not just ordinary gossip. Some of this information seems to be coming from inside my own house. Beatrice frowned. Do you think someone close to you is spreading this? Arabella hesitated, but answered. Look, I don't know. But I've started to suspect a few people, and I need your help. Arabella then talked about all the people she suspected. Her cousin Celeste, the housekeeper, cousin Edmund, and the nosy neighbor. After hearing everything, Beatrice grew thoughtful. Arabella, you're surrounded by suspects. Arabella sighed. Yeah, I know, but I still don't have any proof against any of them. Beatrice took her hand. Then we'll find out. You're not going through this alone. Those words brought some comfort to Arabella's heart because at that moment she was certain of just one thing. Among all the rumors, suspicions, and secrets spreading through London, Beatrice was the only person she trusted completely. And so they began to investigate. The first person they decided to watch was Celeste, Arabella's cousin. In the days that followed, Arabella started paying attention to every detail whenever Celeste visited the house. At a dinner, Celeste casually remarked, I heard that some families are selling their properties. Here. Tough times for many. Beatrice shot a quick glance at Arabella. That sounded very close to the rumors that were going around. Arabella replied calmly, Fortunately, Celeste, that's not our case. Celeste smiled and said, Of course, of course. The next day, Arabella decided to keep an eye on the housekeeper. In the afternoon, Arabella and Beatrice deliberately had a conversation in the parlor. In a low voice, Arabella said, My father might be thinking about renovating the country estate. Beatrice immediately understood what the plan was. It was the guest. The housekeeper was arranging flowers near the window. She seemed not to be paying attention. But discreetly, Arabella noticed that the housekeeper paused for a second as she listened to the conversation. The next day, a new rumor was circulating among the ladies of the town. I heard the Montclairs are making changes to their properties. Beatrice was surprised. That was way too fast. Arabella stayed silent. That made the housekeeper an even stronger suspect. A few days later, they ran into Edmund at a social event. He seemed particularly interested in talking to Arabella. My dear cousin, I imagine your family's handling these unpleasant rumors well. Arabella watched him carefully. My family and Edmund have nothing to hide. Edmund gave a polite smile. Of course, naturally. But all these conversations always ended up with the same person, the nosy neighbor. Whenever something happened, the neighbor would rush over to Arabella to share the latest gossip. One fine day, Beatrice was waiting for a friend in the main hall of the Montclair mansion. Arabella had quickly gone upstairs to fetch a book she wanted to show her friend. While she waited, Beatrice slowly walked down the hallway. That's when she noticed something strange. Near the hallway, almost hidden, were Lady Francesca Montclair, Arabella's mother, and Lady Windy, the famous gossiping neighbor. They seemed to be talking in secret. That wasn't normal. Lady Francesca always received guests in the living room, never hidden away in hallways. Beatrice hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but just as she was about to head back to the room, she heard a sentence that made her stop in her tracks. Lady Francesca's voice was low, almost a whisper. Just mention that Lord Montclair might be moving with his family to the countryside, but don't say anything too direct. Beatrice felt a chill run down her spine. Lady Francesca went on. People in this city are incredibly imaginative. All it takes is planting a little doubt and they do the rest. Lady Wind opened her fan with satisfaction. And you have to admit, the rumors about the Montclairs have been the most interesting of the season. Lady Francesca replied calmly, Excellent. That keeps the family name in the spotlight. Beatrice stood completely still. Her heart started beating faster. That couldn't possibly mean what it seemed to. Before she could hear more, footsteps echoed down the stairs. It was Arabella coming down. Beatrice quickly returned to the room and pretended to study an old portrait hanging on the wall. A moment later, Arabella walked in, smiling. Sorry for the delay, my father had left the book in his study. Beatrice turned around slowly. Her face was a little paler than usual. Arabella noticed. Beatrice, is everything all right? At that moment, Arabella's mother entered the room and saw Beatrice. She didn't know Beatrice was in the house and grew suspicious that she might have overheard something. Beatrice, it's so good to see you. Did you just arrive? No one announced your arrival. Beatrice replied with as much composure as she could muster. I arrived a few minutes ago, m'lady. Arabella went upstairs to get a book. Lady Francesca tilted her head. Ah, I see. She then walked slowly over to the center table in the room, absent-mindedly adjusting a flower arrangement. I hope you haven't been waiting long, said Lady Francesca. No, not at all. Beatrice then forced a small smile. But her mind still echoed with the words she had heard minutes earlier in the hallway. All it takes is planting a small doubt and people do the rest. But she still couldn't say anything to Arabella, because if she was right, the truth could destroy much more than just the rumors. It could destroy the family itself, Montclair. Arabella and Beatrice went out to the garden shortly after that conversation in the living room. Arabella walked cheerfully along the stone path. I finally found the book I wanted to show you. It's a collection of poems my father brought from Paris years ago, she said, flipping through a few pages. Beatrice tried to smile, but her mind was still stuck on the conversation she'd overheard in the hallway. She looked at Arabella, feeling a weight in her chest. Maybe she had misunderstood. Maybe Lady Francesca had been talking about something else. Lady, Beatrice? Arabella called, noticing her friend's silence. You're very quiet today. Oh, I'm just thinking about those rumors. All of them. Arabella sighed. Me too. They then sat down on the iron bench under a tree. Arabella then said, sometimes it feels like we're chasing shadows. We've investigated so many people and still nothing makes sense. Beatrice hesitated. The truth almost slipped from her lips, but something held her back. What if she was wrong? What if that destroyed Arabella's relationship with her own mother? So she just said, don't worry, we'll figure it out. But Beatrice spent the rest of the walk in silence. Later, as night was falling, Arabella was in her room when she heard a soft knock at the door. Come in, she said. The door then opened, and it was Lady Francesca, her mother. She entered gracefully, carrying a small candelabrum that softly lit up the room. May I talk to you? A moment, dear? Arabella looked surprised. Of course, Mom. Lady Francesca sat on the edge of Arabella's bed. For a few seconds, she stayed silent, as if she were carefully choosing her words. Then she said, I've been thinking a lot about these rumors about our family. Arabella sighed. Oh, Mom, me too. I'm trying to figure out who's spreading all this. Lady Francesca nodded slowly. I could imagine, my daughter. And then she looked directly at Arabella. But there's something that's been worrying me. What is it, Mon? Look, dear, I don't want to accuse anyone unfairly, but I've started to notice something strange. Have you noticed that every time a new rumor pops up, your friend Beatrice always seems to know before anyone else? Arabella reacted immediately. Beatrice? That's impossible. Maybe, but I've also noticed that she asks a lot of questions about family matters. Arabella shook her head. Mom, she's just trying to help. Lady Francesca continued carefully. Today, for example, she was alone in the living room when I arrived and she seemed nervous. Maybe it's just a coincidence, said Arabella. Lady Francesca slowly got up from the bed. Yeah, maybe. And then she walked to the door but stopped before leaving, turned to Arabella and said, I'm only saying this because I want to protect you. Sometimes, dear, the people we trust the most are the ones who let us down. And then she left the room. Arabella was left alone, staring at the flickering candle flames. She tried to push that thought away immediately. Beatrice was her best friend. It was impossible, wasn't it? But for the first time since the rumors began to spread through London's elegant salons, a small doubt started to grow in her heart. The next morning, Lady Arabella woke up with a thought that had kept her up all night. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. Whenever a new rumor appears, her friend always seems to know before anyone else. Arabella didn't want to believe it, any of it. Beatrice had been her closest friend since childhood. But what is? She decided she wouldn't jump to conclusions. First, she would observe. In the days that followed, Arabella started paying closer attention to every detail. She tried to analyze everything calmly. If Beatrice was guilty, why would she help so much with the investigation? Why would she defend Arabella in front of other people? Nothing seemed to make sense. But she also remembered what her mother had said. She asks a lot of questions. And that was true. Maybe her mother was mistaken, but she needed to hear it from her friend herself. The next afternoon, Arabella asked Beatrice to come to the mansion. The two of them walked to the garden where they used to talk, but the mood between them was different. Heavier. Beatrice noticed it right away. Arabella, is everything okay? Arabella took a few seconds to answer. Then she said, I need to ask you something. Beatrice nodded. Of course. Arabella took a deep breath. Are you the one spreading rumors about my family? The silence that followed there seemed endless. Beatrice stood completely still. Her eyes widened. What? Arabella continued, her voice slightly trembling. Whenever a rumor comes up, you always seem to know about it first. Beatrice shook her head. Because you told me everything. You really think I would do that? Arabella hesitated. I don't know what to think anymore. Beatrice then took a step back. Her eyes were filled with tears. After all these years, do you really think I would destroy your family? Arabella felt her heart tighten, but then she went on. Beatrice, I need to know the truth. Beatrice then answered firmly, despite the pain in her voice. Then listen closely. She looked her friend straight in the eyes. I would never do something like that to you. A wind blew through the trees, and for a moment, neither of them said a word. Their friendship, built over years, now seemed on the verge of breaking. And without either of them knowing, the real person responsible for all of this was at the window, watching him from afar. Because inside the Montclair mansion itself, Lady Francesca had already gotten exactly what she wanted to plant the perfect seed of doubt. She smiled as she watched the argument. She couldn't hear the conversation, but she could see the look of disappointment on her daughter's face. But in the end, she wasn't able to hear the conversation, entirely because the housekeeper had called her away. Beatrice was still staring at Arabella, her eyes shining with tears, repeating, I would never do something like that to you. Arabella felt her heart tighten. Part of her wanted to believe right away, but another part was still confused by her mother's words and all the strange coincidences. My mother said it, and it all makes sense, Beatrice. If it wasn't you, then how do you explain Mince? You're the person who knows the most about my life, about our family's life. My mother. When Beatrice heard those words, everything started to make sense. She was unsure if she had understood, right, what she heard that day in the hallway. But now, with Arabella accusing her, she understood everything. One moment, Arabella. Was it your mother who said it was me? Look, not in those exact words, but she thought you were really nervous that day. Yes, Arabella, I really was, because I had just heard something. Arabella then raised her eyebrows. Thought? That's right. That day, when you went to look for the book, I heard voices in the hallway. It was your mother talking to that nosy neighbor. Bella then winked. The nosy neighbor, Lady Wind? Yes, her. Beatrice then took a deep breath. They were speaking quietly, like they didn't want to be heard. They were hiding in the corner of the hallway. And what were they saying? Beatrice then continued. Look, I only managed to hear one sentence before your mother saw me. Beatrice repeated the exact words. Just make sure to spread this carefully. The more scandalous it sounds, the more attention we'll get. That's what I heard. Arabella turned pale. No, that's not possible. Why would my mother do something like that? And why didn't you tell me before? Look, it's because I was just as shocked as you were, Bella. I thought I must have misunderstood, and I didn't want to mess with your relationship with your mom. But now that she's accusing me and making you think I would betray our friendship, I realized I didn't have another choice, except to tell you. Look, this doesn't make any sense at all. I know, Beatrice replied. My mom? Spreading rumors about her own family? Then Beatrice said, I also found it really hard to believe. Why, I don't want to lose your friendship, and I want to prove to you that I'm telling you the truth. And how would you do that? Even if it were true, she would never admit it. Look, she wouldn't admit it to you. Your mom said that to throw you off. Let's do it like this. You're going to come in angry, saying you hate me and never want to see me again. And you're going to hide in the hallway next to the living room. When she thinks you're not around, I'll go in, confront her, and you'll hear everything. Look, this is ridiculous. Arabella, it's the only way to know the truth. I can't believe we're even considering this. Arabella, said Beatrice softly, if I'm wrong, you can call me crazy, and we'll both just forget about this forever. I won't bother you anymore, I promise. Arabella then closed her eyes for a moment and nodded. All right, let's do it. Beatrice took a deep breath. Aye. The two of them then walked back inside the Montclair mansion. They entered the living room. Beatrice stopped in the middle of the room and said, Now. Arabella looked at her friend and then hardened her expression. I can't believe I wasted so much time trusting you, she said loudly. Beatrice replied with equal intensity. You don't have to believe me. Well, I don't believe you, Arabella replied, turning sharply. You destroyed my trust, and I never want to see you again. Arabella walked with determined steps toward the side hallway, as if she were furious, but as soon as she turned the corner, she leaned against the wall, hidden. Lady Francesca Montclair had overheard the argument. In the living room, Beatrice remained standing, motionless. And a few seconds later, Lady Francesca appeared. Beatrice? What happened? Lady Francesca said, feigning surprise. Beatrice then slowly lifted her eyes, as if she were still shaken. This is all your fault, she shot back. Then Lady Francesca said, Excuse me? What do you mean? And then Beatrice shouted, You set me up against her in the hallway, on the side, hidden behind the wall. Arabella caught her breath. Lady Francesca then narrowed her eyes. I have no idea what you're talking about. Beatrice stepped forward. Arabella, she thinks it was me who spread the rumors. Lady Francesca then sighed as if it were merely an inconvenience. Oh, that's unfortunate.
Regrettable?
Did I lose her friendship because of that? Well, Beatrice, young friendships are dramatic by nature. And they recover. Lady Francesca replied coldly. Beatrice then looked her straight in the eye. I heard your conversation with Lady Wind. The change on Lady Francesca's face was almost imperceptible, but enough. I don't know what you're talking about, Beatrice. Spread it carefully. The more scandalous it seems, the more attention we'll get. Isn't that what you said? A silence fell over Paul. Watch what you say, young lady. You're in my house. I'm just saying what I heard, said Beatrice. I've always thought you were quite the busybody, always poking around where you're not wanted. I don't know you any explanation for what I do or don't do for my family. For the family? Beatrice said. Dragging your husband's reputation through the mud, making up rumors about your daughter, letting everyone talk about you, does that count as doing something for your family? Then Lady Francesca, possessed by rage, said, And what do you know about any of this, you disrespectful girl? Are you married? Do you have children? You're a spoiled little girl who barely just got out of diapers. She then walked slowly across the hall and continued it. You still don't understand how high society works. Families that stop being talked about disappear. She then ran her fingers elegantly across the table. But the scandals? It's the scandals that keep the doors open, invites come in, people pay attention. Out of sight, out of mind. Beatrice then shook her head in disbelief. At her own daughter's expense? Unfortunately, we all have to make sacrifices. She wouldn't understand today, but one day she'll thank me. At that moment, Lady Arabella appeared at the entrance of the hall, pale, her eyes full of tears. I'll never thank you for such cruelty, she shouted. And then she ran off to her room. Arabella, her mother called out. Then Lady Francesca turned to Beatrice. Get out of my house, you insolent girl, was all Beatrice said. What a disappointment. And she left the mansion. Already in her room, sitting on the floor hugging her knees, Arabella cried a lot. Everything she believed about her mother seemed to have shattered in just a few minutes. The person who was supposed to protect her was the same person who had caused all that humiliation. A knock then echoed on the door. It was Arabella who heard her father's voice, Lord Montclair. He opened the door slowly, but when he saw her face, he immediately knew something was wrong. And then he asked, what happened? My daughter? For a few seconds, she couldn't speak, and then she told her father everything. Lord Montclair grew paler with every sentence Arabella spoke. And then he replied, My daughter, I swear I had no idea what your mother was doing. I am completely ashamed. The next morning, Lady Francesca was summoned to her husband's study. At first, Lord Montclair spoke with a calm that was far more frightening than any shout. He then told her something extremely serious happened last night. Lady Francesca maintained her elegant composure. And then he continued, Francesca, were you the one who spread those rumors? I did what was necessary, she replied. Lord Montclair looked at her as if he were seeing a stranger. Necessary? Lady Francesca answered coldly. Our family was starting to fade from society's attention. Invitations dwindling, conversations dying out. You know what happens to forgotten families? And so you decided to create a scandal? He asked. Scandals attract interest. And interest keeps alliances alive. You know that. Then he said, And did you even think about our daughter's reputation? How selfish, Francesca. After all this, I think it would be best if you spent some time in our country cottage, far from high society, so you can really reflect on everything you've done. Have you lost your mind? She replied. Staying away from the balls, the teas, and everything else? That's when we'll truly be forgotten. Then he said, Not us. Arabella and I aren't going. You are? But, my love, what do you mean? What? He then continued. I'm disappointed in you. I need to reflect on everything you've done to our family and whether I'll be able to forgive you. Pack your bags today. We'll see each other, maybe, next season. A few days later, Arabella went to Beatrice's house. When Beatrice opened the door, she was surprised. For a moment, neither of them said a word. Then Arabella spoke. I came to ask for forgiveness. Beatrice smiled. You had reasons to doubt. No, replied Arabella. I should have trusted you. Forgive me, my friend. I love you. Beatrice's eyes filled with tears. She took a deep breath and then hugged her. I'm here for whatever you need. You're my sister at heart. And then both of them cried, overcome with emotion. A few weeks later, Arabella showed up at a small literary gathering. And for the first time in a long while, she felt at peace at an event. And as she watched the guests, a familiar voice came from behind her. It was Duke Sebastian, the man whose name had been caught up in the gossip. And then he said, Lady Arabella, it's so good to see you here. Duke Sebastian, I think I owe you an apology. An apology? But you haven't done anything wrong to me. She then said, Yes, but your name got dragged into unsounded gossip. I'm sorry about that. Sebastian smiled at her and said, Look, all of this showed me something interesting. We were both put into the same story without even really knowing each other. She smiled back at him and replied, Well, that's true. Then the Duke said, So, Lady Arabella, I thought maybe we should set the record straight. Beatrice, who was nearby, noticed the conversation and discreetly stepped back a few paces, pretending to look at a painting on the wall. Sebastian then reached out his hand. Sebastian then reached out his hand. Lady Arabella, would you allow me to keep you company for a few minutes? She whitely accepted his hand. I would love that. The two of them then walked slowly to a quieter corner of the library, where a few guests were leafing through books and chatting in low voices. Sebastian leaned a little closer to Arabella and said in a low tone, I hope this is just the first of many conversations with you. She looked into his eyes, smiled, and replied, If they're as interesting as this one, I believe there will be many more. And that afternoon, quietly, a meeting was born that would soon become one of the most delightful topics of the season, the marriage between Lady Arabella and Duke Sebastian.